Most Americans believe World War II was won on D-Day. They are looking at the wrong map. The real turning point wasn't a beach in France, it was a dusty field in Russia called Kursk. Imagine 2 million men, 6,000 tanks, and the fate of Western civilization hanging by a thread. If the Red Army had broken here, Hitler would have gained the resources to fight the US for a century. This is the story of the greatest tank battle ever fought, the battle history almost forgot. Winter, 1943. The German Sixth Army has vanished in the snows of Stalingrad. Hitler is trembling. For the first time, he feels the end. But his best strategist, Erich von Manstein, sees a window of hope. He points at a salient, a bulge in the Soviet lines around the city of Kursk. If we cut this bulge at the base, Manstein argued, we can trap 1.5 million Soviet soldiers. Hitler named it Operation Citadel. But here's the problem. Hitler didn't trust his generals anymore. He delayed. 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. He wanted the new Tiger and Panther tanks. Every day he waited, 10,000 Soviet civilians were digging trenches. By the time the Panzers moved, they weren't attacking a line, they were attacking a fortress. How did the Soviets know? They had a ghost in the machine, a spy ring codenamed Lucy, based in Switzerland. They had direct access to the German High Command's messages. Stalin knew the exact day of the attack, but knowing isn't enough. You have to trick the enemy. The Soviets used maskirovka, the art of strategic deception. They built 2,000 fake tanks made of wood and canvas. They moved entire armies only at night, in total radio silence. German reconnaissance planes flew over and reported, "The Soviets are weak." It was a lie. Behind the fake wooden tanks were 1.9 million battle-hardened soldiers. They built 8 layers of defense. The first layer was meant to slow them down, the second to bleed them, the third, that was the graveyard. Let's look at the monsters of Kursk. This wasn't just a battle of men, it was a trial of engineering. On one side, the Tiger I, a 54-ton Predator. Its 88mm KWK-36 gun was legendary. It could core a Soviet tank from 2,000 meters before the enemy even saw it. Its frontal armor? 100mm of hardened steel. To the Soviets, it was an indestructible ghost. But the Tiger was a diva. It required constant maintenance. Its interleaved wheels got jammed with frozen mud and rocks. It was too heavy for most bridges. Then there was Hitler's new toy, the Panther, designed specifically to outclass the T-34. It had sloped armor and a high-velocity 75mm gun. But at Kursk, the Panther was its own worst enemy. Out of the 200 Panthers deployed on day 1, 160 broke down due to transmission failure or engine fires. They were literally self-destructing. Now look at the Soviet T-34/76. It was primitive, it was loud, it was cramped. Most crews didn't even have a radio. They used flags to communicate. The steel was roughly cast, but the T-34 was a masterclass in effective simplicity. Its sloped armor made German shells bounce off like pebbles. Its wide tracks allowed it to glide over mud where tigers sank, and most importantly, the math of war. Germany built 1,300 Tigers. The Soviets built over 84,000 T-34s. At Kursk, the Germans brought a scalpel. The Soviets brought a sledgehammer. One was precise, the other was unstoppable. July 5th, 4:30 a.m. The silence of the steppe is shattered by 20,000 Soviet guns. The Germans were stunned. They hadn't even started their engines. In the north, Field Marshal Walter Model, the Lion of Defense, launched the Ninth Army, but he ran into a wall of iron. The Soviets had planted 400,000 mines in the northern sector alone. German panzers were blowing up every 10 meters. Engineers had to clear minefields under heavy machine gun fire, often using their bare hands. After 7 days of suicidal fighting, the German North advanced only 10 miles. Model lost 20,000 men and 200 tanks for nothing. The North had failed, but in the South, the story was terrifyingly different. Field Marshal von Manstein unleashed the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. These were the elite, the fanatics, Leibstandarte, das Reich, Totenkopf. They didn't just attack, they practiced armored spearhead tactics. They smashed through the first Soviet belt in hours, they bypassed the second. The SS Tigers were knocking out Soviet T-34s by the hundreds. Stalin was furious. He telephoned General Zhukov. Are they going to break through? The Soviets were running out of space. The road to Kursk was opening. Zhukov made a desperate gamble. He ordered the 5th Guards Tank Army to move 250 miles in 3 days. They drove day and night. No sleep, no stops. Their destination, a tiny railway junction where history would be decided. Prokhorovka. July 12th, the climax of human desperation. 800 Soviet tanks against 300 German panzers. As the sun rose, the Soviet tanks didn't stop to aim. They charged at full speed, 50 kilometers per hour. The air was thick with a toxic mix of oil, smoke, and dust. Visibility dropped to zero. The battlefield became a melee, a chaotic brawl of steel. The Soviets knew they couldn't win a long-range duel, so they got close. T-34s literally rammed Tiger tanks, using their vehicles as 30-ton bullets. Tank commanders, blinded by smoke, popped their hatches to sea and were decapitated by flying shrapnel. Inside the tanks, the temperature reached 50 degrees Celsius. Men went deaf from the constant hammering of shells against armor. One Soviet survivor said, "The earth was groaning. It wasn't the sound of engines. It was the sound of the world ending." By 4 p.m., the fields were covered in 400 burning Soviet tanks and nearly 100 German ones. Tactically, the Germans held the field. They claimed victory, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. Germany had no more reserves. Their steel heart was broken. The Soviets, however, had entire armies waiting behind the hills. Hitler's last hope for an offensive in the east died in the smoke of Prokhorovka. Why does this matter to us today? Why should a student in Chicago or London care about a field in Russia? Because Kursk was the invisible shield of the Western world. Let's look at the terrifying alternate reality. If Hitler had won at Kursk, the Red Army would have likely collapsed. Stalin would have been forced to sign a separate peace. Now imagine 1944. General Eisenhower prepares for D-Day, but instead of facing 50 thin German divisions in France, he faces 3 million veteran German soldiers. Instead of a few Panthers, the beaches are lined with thousands of Tigers. D-Day wouldn't have been a victory, it would have been the greatest military disaster in U.S. history. Germany would have had the time and resources to finish their V3 guns and their nuclear program. London would have been erased. New York would have been next. Kursk broke the German spine. It drained their tanks, their fuel, and their hope. By the time the Allies landed in Normandy, the German army was a hollow shell, its best men buried in the Russian dirt. History was not decided at Normandy, it was enabled at Kursk. Without the blood of the East, the freedom of the West would not exist. History isn't just about who won, it's about the cost. The fields of Kursk are still full of metal today, a reminder of the day the Nazi dream turned to ash. Next time you watch a wwii movie, remember the T-34s in the dust, because that's where the world we live in was truly born. Subscribe for more deep dives into the turning points of history.